Good morning. My name is Dr. Mike Delaberto. I'm an agricultural economist with the LSU Ad Center in Baton Rouge. My principal responsibilities are working in the areas of farm management and agricultural policy for principal row crops produced in Louisiana. This morning I'd like to present some economic analysis on a perspective of really the emerging and the growing hemp industry in the U.S. and as well as the state of Louisiana. U.S. producers are planting less hemp in 2020 than they did in 2019, and that really was the result of regulatory uncertainty, surplus production that was left over from the 2019 crop year, as wholesale prices for not only hemp fiber but also for flower production and CBD oil began to decline. Market conditions saw an oversupply of the market, which resulted in a suppression of prices. If we go back 1 year prior to that, if we look at 2019, between 2019 and 2018, the number of hemp licenses nearly quadrupled in the U.S., which really speaks to, one, the niche of the industry, but also how much excitement and how much buzz was around the hemp industry. As more producers came online, the regulatory and the production uncertainties, coupled with market uncertainties, were really apparent from this crop and have really been causing so much surplus production to remain in stocks or in inventories as a result of the declining prices that we're seeing. This slide depicts U.S. hemp acreage, and one thing I want to talk about is the data sources that a lot of information in the hemp industry is based on private reporting services. So there's a little bit of discrepancies between private industry outlets within the U.S. hemp industry and USDA data. In this slide, you can see that they estimate hemp acres in Louisiana to be anywhere between 1 and 10,000 acres. The next slide, hemp acres by state, has Louisiana with over 2,200 hemp acres in 2020. Nationally, Hemp Industrial Daily, the Hemp Business Journal, they estimate that the U.S. could have as much as 405,000 acres of hemp planted for all types of use in 2020, with indoor growth space approaching 93 million square feet. Now, when you combine those numbers or you look at the USDA's certified acres from the Farm Service agencies, those acreage numbers tell a completely different story in Louisiana. USDA FSA estimates that acres for hemp in Louisiana are barely over 500. Now, there's causes of debate in those numbers. Majority of those are growers that are already enrolled and are already comfortable and familiar with the certified acreage reporting process that USDA mandates. The biggest characteristics of hemp production is how hemp is categorized by end use. Hemp for CBD or flower production has no doubt really been a driving force in the hemp industry. This slide breaks down the USDA certified acres for hemp grown for CBD purposes, and you can see Evangeline Parish leads acreage in the state at almost 115 acres. The next highest parish is Rapides. Hemp produced for fiber, or biomass, is centered in Madison Parish, where we see about 172, 173 acres. The next highest parish is in Franklin. Again, the discrepancies in these reported acreage has been a major source of uncertainty within the industry. As more data becomes clear on the supply side picture, I think we're going to see prices start to respond and behave accordingly as the forces of supply and demand are going to dictate what those equilibrium prices are in the market. But I want to go back and really talk about the 2014 Farm Bill. The 2014 Farm Bill designated pilot programs for industrial hemp in the U.S. So between the 2014 and the 2018 Farm Bill, and you'll recall the 2018 Farm Bill established hemp as a viable and protected agricultural commodity in the U.S., licenses under this pilot program saw tremendous, almost really linear growth year after year after year. So the incitement was there from the get-go with hemp. Hemp licenses under this pilot program, just in a 4-year time span, went from a little less than 300 in 2014 to as much as close to 4,000 by the year 2018, when more states were coming online with hemp being legalized in 2018 per the Farm Bill. Now, a lot of this is the regulatory uncertainties. As more data becomes available, as data is transparent within the hemp industry, I think that's going to start to act to reduce some of the market uncertainties that we're seeing within this new and niche industry. There are three leading markets for hemp based on the part of the plant that's used, and this slide illustrates that the three major markets for hemp are fiber, seed, and flower production. Fibers are used in fabrics, textiles, yarn, paper, carpeting, home furnishings, construction, as well as some insulation materials. Seed and grain are used not only for hemp seed, but also for oil cake and some oil which can be used in food and beverages and as an ingredient in dietary supplements and even as a dairy additive. The cold presses of filtered hemp oil is used in body products like soap, shampoo, and cosmetics. But hemp flower, on the right-hand side of the screen, is the primary source of the plant's available cannabinoids, which tend to be concentrated in the flowering head or the bud of the plant. Extracts and derivatives of the cannabinoid plant are marketed as CBD. And some would suggest that there really even needs to be a fourth segment of this market concentrated on the extracts, and that's where that CBD production is in. There's no doubt the incitement, the potential marketing gains from CBD are driving hemp acreage year over year, or really up until the 2019 crop year, which is something I'll talk about in the subsequent slides. The USDA estimates that the hemp-based product sales can approach over $800 million. You can see this slide depicts just some of the market segments of hemp-derived CBD and related extracts. A majority of that is centered in personal care, beauty products, as well as the CBD and even in the food industry additive category. But I think it's interesting when you look at hemp-based product sales by category. On this graph, you'll see that outside of that CBD concentration in market sales, you're starting to see the industrial applications in construction, building materials, insulation, and biocomposites really becoming a major driving force for possibly the next decade of hemp. Prior to 2020, we really saw a lot of the excitement around hemp centered on that CBD production, but I think we're starting to see kind of the paradigm shift in terms of the market uses for those products. Now again, this is subject to oftentimes regulatory approval, but the end users of hemp within the biocomposites manufacturing and construction process for fiber and biomass seem to indicate that that would be the future of where the U.S. hemp industry is going from a product in or product use standpoint. This slide depicts a chart of long-term outlook until 2030 from the National Industrial Hemp Council, where you actually see that paradigm shift. What I just talked about in that previous slide, you can see the focus on CBD production and the percent of field acres in that end use starting to switch for fiber production that would indicate anticipated strong growth in that biocomposite or in the industrial applications of industrial hemp from 2020 to 2030. This perspective on wholesale hemp prices is from Kush.com, and that is a private price reporting service based on hundreds of individualized reported sales through their membership or through their subscription-based network. The prices are reported for different hemp categories over the past 6 months, and the current market prices were reported through the summer. On average, the margin of error within these studies or within this reporting service can be anywhere from 10 to 15%. Although I am hesitant to show some of the market data, I want to illustrate one major point from this presentation today, and that's the sources of market data within the hemp industry. These market sources are private price reporting services that really need to be taken with a grain of salt. These represent some, not all of the sales that are made. So as more transparency becomes apparent within the hemp sector from a price discovery standpoint, I think that's where we're going to start to see some of this unknown, if you will, start to be combated with market knowledge. This slide is the hemp prices for wholesale biomass, and you can see it's anywhere between $7 and $40 per pound. CBG biomass averaged about 61 pounds through May. The COVID pandemic really saw a downturn in prices, as evident in what's going to be a theme throughout these next pricing slides that I show. Hemp prices for seed vary anywhere between $1 to $2 to even 75 cents per seed, which correlates to about $578 per pound in this private price reporting service. CBD for crude oil production, concentrates, smokable CBD concentrates have averaged about 9.5 or $9.50 per gram, and the average order size was about 11 kilograms. Again, what is the validity? What's the transparency behind these numbers? Average prices, do they necessarily correlate with the average number of marketings per year? This is a little bit different than USDA, NASS from some of our row crop producers. We don't know if this is a weighted average of the number of sales at different points of the time or just the number of sales that happen to be reported in a particular calendar month that could see really varying sales if sales were even made at all. CBD distillate, you could see about $1,300 per kilogram, and other popular cannabinoids would include CBG, CBC oil here, and you could really see a major downturn in the CBD prices here, really as a result of oversupply, oversaturation of the market over time. Again, as all of that production in 2019 came online, wholesale prices fell because the market was simply oversupplied. Hemp prices for flower are around $160 per pound. Again, same story of declining prices over time within this private price reporting service. And you can see this is just a snapshot from Kush.com. I'm not advocating their reporting service, but it just goes to show you how much product variability there are within the hemp industry. Again, it's going to be derived on the main uses of that product, but you also see a substantial variation in the amount of prices for the different products of industrial hemp. Without actual long-term observations of U.S. hemp production, it's really difficult to estimate with any sort of accuracy the expected yields, the cost of production, and really the net returns and profitability for farms that may choose to grow industrial hemp, not only in Louisiana but in the U.S. In addition to differences in the estimates on the cost of production, there's also discrepancies in yield and market prices, something that was evident from the previous slides. Here you could see that the feasibility of hemp has its own set of environmental concerns such as climate and moisture, agronomic considerations that have to be addressed, variety selection and genetics, soil types, how do we prepare that seed bed, how do we plant it, can we drill plant it like conventional crops, corn and soybeans in the state, what about fertilizer, what about weeds, insects, disease control, what's labeled for use with industrial hemp. Labeling laws for chemicals and fungicides, are they effective at combating these diseases or pests that would be adverse to the crop? But oftentimes we need more research to really allow us to identify best management practices that can be incorporated into a producer's farm management plan. And there's also production and harvest considerations, market uncertainty, harvesting methods, drying, the retting of this crop. How are those stalks going to break down over time? What's the efficacy of harvest methods based on the desired end use of that crop? They're going to differ. The production practices are differentiated in this slide by hemp's end use. Are you growing it for fiber? Are you growing it for seed? Or are you growing it for flower production? And on this slide, I've attempted to break down the agronomic and the economic considerations, really from everything to planting density, to harvest concentrations and considerations, the height of the plant, the price, and also the production processes that may be associated with some of these end uses. This information was contained from the Congressional Research Service, which did a study of the available literature on the production practices and the pricing information through third-party private price reporting services. But again, this is just based on a snapshot of what the industry is still doing and what the industry is currently evaluating. So I think, again, this speaks to the variability that's even associated within hemp for fiber or hemp for biomass production, not only state to state, but also farm to farm in the U.S. While there's great interest in expanding hemp production, there's so much uncertainty about the economics of doing so. There are environmental concerns, adaptation concerns, agronomic considerations, product development that are associated with, one, the long-term feasibility, but also the survivability of the hemp industry. As with most other crops, the technology employed to produce hemp, the timing and the nature of these cultural operations are going to be highly dependent upon the end use for which that product is being produced. And what I've shown here is just the variable expenses such as the chemicals, the fertilizers, the transportation, the seed costs, the drying, the labor, as well as some of the marketing and regulatory expenses that may not be associated with the other crops that we commonly produce here in Louisiana, such as licensing fees, sampling fees, inspection fees, etc. Then there's also the fixed cost of machinery and the land that are required to produce this crop. The production economics for hemp, as you can see on this slide, have a pretty significant range, and that's going to be dictated by end use. The biggest thing on this table that jumps out is the seed or the transplants. Is hemp grown for biomass, where a direct seed can be drilled into the ground? Those seed costs are anywhere between $60 or $100 per acre. But then if you're looking at a plasticulture system or transplants of industrial hemp that are going to be grown for flower or CBD production, then the actual slip can range anywhere from $5 to $9 per individualized plant. And when those plants are scaled over a rep farm acre, well, then that number can jump to between $5,000 and $7,000 per acre. Very, very substantial, very interesting from a crop standpoint, but also it's just one cog in the wheel of all the different production costs that are associated with hemp, most of which we are still researching and we still don't know. I've attempted to look at some of the USDA data, some of the data that's vetted by universities such as the University of Kentucky, Arkansas, Tennessee, some work that the Ad Center is doing to really start to compare and contrast some of the production systems that are associated with industrial hemp. And you can see when we look at the production cost per acre for grain and fiber, when we don't compare chemicals and labor, when you look at fertilization requirements, disking, harvesting cost, the cost between grain and fiber do appear to be a lot more competitive to say maybe traditional row crop enterprises in the state, subject to we have an established market that we're selling into. And you can see hemp for grain or fiber can be anywhere between $233 or $311 per acre, less chemicals and labor, which can often be a substantial portion of the budget. This graph just talks about the percentage share of those variable costs of production. Where is that, say, $300.11 per acre? Where is that sourced from to produce 1 acre of hemp fiber? This next slide talks about CBD production, if that plant is going to be used or that plant is going to be used for CBD production through a combination grain fiber flower production system. You can see those costs jump up significantly to about $650 per acre. But where the substantial costs lie is estimating the cost for CBD oil production. Here you could see if it's grown in a plasticulture system, which is traditional to maybe specialty crop, vegetable producers that are going to bed their rows. They're going to put that white plastic down. They're going to let the plant germinate and come up through that plastic. Or if they're going to CBD production, using a row crop system, bring in the transplants, very substantial from a dollar per acre standpoint. Here's where we're starting to see the production cost per acre for industrial hemp really starting to increase to really exceed a lot of the row crops that are currently produced in our state. And here you could see the estimated variable cost for CBD production or for oil production can be upwards of $13,000 per acre, which is much as $7,500 or $8,000 of that cost simply associated with obtaining the transplanted seedlings for that field. Harvest is also in transportation makes up a large portion of this budget too, so it's a very labor-intensive crop, very expensive crop to produce relative to the type of information that we have now. I think ongoing research is going to be able to shed light on this as to which part of these categories can maybe be refined or cut out altogether. I've attempted to begin to start to look at the cost and return standpoint of industrial hemp. This is from a study that USDA sourced in the final rule that they put out for industrial hemp. And you can see I've looked at the product, I've looked at the yield and the estimated farm price, and I've attempted to match that with some quality standards and some thresholds that were common in the literature by some university recommendations. And here I've started to look at sensitivity analysis. I've varied the price and the yield for hemp used for CBD. And although these numbers can appear very, very large, it only appears profitable at the upper end of the price spectrum and the upper end of the yield spectrum. There's so much more we don't know, and much like anything else with economics, the feasibility and the validity of being able to generate tens of thousands of dollars on a per acre standpoint, in all practicality, but would be very, very, very slim to actually achieve because we just don't have the research that's caught up with the economics to date. For fiber production, it's the same story. As we start to increase the price and increase the yield for hemp fiber, subject to about $560 per acre for variable cost, you could see on the upper end of yields and the upper echelon of prices, hemp for fiber does start to produce a positive net return to the grower. Same story with hemp for grain, higher prices and higher yields. Again, if we revisit what we talked about earlier with the environmental concerns, the agronomic consideration, the harvest concerns that we're seeing, those questions have to be answered so information like this can be quantified and we can start to narrow down the scope of how we're looking at prices and yields and the combinations of both that are going to produce economic returns to the producer. But a big limitation still is associated with agricultural lenders. What agricultural lenders should know: the type of hemp being grown, the regulations. Crop insurance says hemp's got to have a processing contract with it for insurability. So it's a viable risk management tool only if certain other criteria are met. If your THC level is too high in that hemp, that's an uninsurable loss. When that crop is destroyed by regulatory inspectors, the producer is not compensated for that. So the producer is holding a lot of liability with this crop. There's tremendous risk and uncertainty that's apparent really in any market. I think those risks are going to be highlighted when we have a new market with really not a lot of known information on it yet. When you look at the types of hemp being produced, fiber, grain, or CBD, considerable high risk with the CBD production, relatively lower risk with grain and fiber, and that's going to hinge on our ability, one, to have a production contract where we have an established market at a prevailing market price. But a lot of the low risk here for fiber and grain is centered on the fact that it doesn't take that much money to invest into the crop. But again, even $1 is too much to invest in a crop if you don't have a viable, vetted, and established market for it. So the long-term viability of the industry, what's the competition from conventional field crops, maybe marijuana, the legalities of that? How is hemp going to compete for acreage? Are we going to see competition that's going to be injected into these hemp markets by end use? And the ability to decrease production and pricing uncertainty, again, is huge. There needs to be transparency, there needs to be an element of risk management, but all of that is going to come with continued market development and research. Market dynamics are going to change, they're going to change quickly within any new industry, and producers are going to enter, production is going to increase, and prices are likely going to suffer for the foreseeable future. This is my contact information. I'd be happy to answer any questions on industrial hemp. I'll point you to the direction of our Ad Center's Working Group webpage, where we do post current research and economic as well as agronomic information on industrial hemp in Louisiana.